privacy changes won't stop with Apple. So Apple's not going to stop making these changes, right? They've kind of drawn the line in the sand and they're only going to just double down on being more strict and making it more difficult. I think other kind of big players, the Googles of the world, etc., are going to follow to some degree. So I know Google, for example, is exploring kind of a privacy sandbox for Android at least. And then also too, you've got like rising regulations around the world. And then with that too, right? Like, other industry experts are saying that this is the new normal. You're going to have less user level data and more kind of reliance on first party data and really just kind of looking at the blended aggregated data.
With the availability of tools and technology, with users wanting to have a better experience, implementing preference centers, quizzes, loyalty programs, anything that can foster direct and consensual data sharing is going to be one of the most important things, because you're going to have to start relying on your customers to give you data, because your data is going to be harder than ever to get. Cool. We're rolling. What's up, Chase? How you doing, dude?
Doing well, thanks, man. How are you?
Good, man. I'm trying out this lightly carbonated protein soda by this company called Bucked Up.
Interesting. I was talking to a buddy and he mentioned like the theme this year of, I think it was called Expo West, was like everything had protein in it. It didn't
hmm
matter whether it was a beverage or a Pop Tart or a chip, everything had protein.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing to have protein, but I think it's really interesting because this thing's got 25 grams of protein, it's 100 calories, and got nothing else in it. So it's literally just a protein drink with carbonation. It's so smart.
Tastes
I
pretty
don't know.
good.
I'm a fan. Yeah, I like it. It's good
Cool.
enough. I mean, it's knowing that it has protein in it, it kind of lowers the bar of taste. And I'm like, it's good enough for a protein drink. So
Cool.
here we
Easy.
are. Anyways, let's shoot this pod. We are jumping into iOS and privacy changes in email and SMS this new era. So in 3, 2, 1.
From the open to the click, they're the masters of the flow. Just watch your list grow and your leads turn to go. Did we retain you so far, or do we have to extend it? If you want results, you gotta send it. Yeah, you gotta send it. Yeah, you gotta send it. Yeah, you gotta send it.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to Send It, where we discuss anything and everything retention marketing, specifically in email and SMS marketing and e-commerce. My name is Jimmy Kim, and I'm here with my co-host,
Chase Diamond.
What's up, Chase? Here, dude. Today we're back with episode 24. We're going to be talking about navigating iOS and privacy changes in email and SMS marketing in the new era. It's a little bit nerdy, but I think that there's going to be some interesting stuff that we get out of this thing, because we're going to dive deep into Apple's privacy moves that have happened, like MPP, which is mail privacy protection. We're going to talk about link tracking protection. No one talks about that in the markets. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about all the continued expansion from iOS 18. I think we're at 18.3 now as we continue to go. And it's really shaping email and SMS marketing in 2025 and beyond. And look, we've all heard the buzz, and you've heard us say this before, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but open rates are becoming more and more unreliable. Link perimeters are being stripped out, and Apple's tracking transparency is starting to limit user data levels that are starting to happen, which is going to change the way that marketing needs to happen. So the question today is going to be all around what does this actually mean for an e-commerce marketer? We're going to examine the changes and details and share the real stats, highlight some stories that we can share, and give you really a step-by-step guide on how to adopt into the changes. So look, if you've seen your open rate spike randomly, or if you struggle to attribute clicks to specific campaigns, or you're seeing too many clicks, the reality is you're not alone. So stay with us on this pod today, and we're going to unpack all of that. So let me start off with the big picture, Chase. I want to start off with all the changes that happened in the recent year, starting with 2024, which was one of the big changes that happened, which was the mail privacy protection. Chase, you want to break it down and tell us about that?
Yeah, so MPP is a short kind of acronym, but it stands for, as Jimmy mentioned, Mail Privacy Protection. So this was first introduced with iOS 15 a number of years back. And essentially what happens is they change the way in which kind of open rates were established. So essentially what happens now with MPP is it's going to preload an image, like a tracking pixel, on Apple servers, making every email look like it was opened. So essentially people that have opted into basically Apple's program, which means they've opted out of being tracked, it's going to show, 100% open rate for those individuals. And the domination, obviously, of people that have opted in because Apple makes it scary is pretty high. So what basically we found out was as much as about 55% of all email opens are now obscured by this MPP, right? So more than half of your opens are now being masked by, potentially a real open, but likely a robotic open, right? So for some brands, they're seeing up to potentially double the reported open rates overnight that they used to see. And additionally, the other difficult part is also hid people's IP address. So it's a little bit harder now to understand someone's location and kind of their approximate device info. And with that, right, like being able to do like segmentation based off of geolocation and other things was something that we love to do. And now it's just way harder unless someone actually buys and they insert their address, which again, as we know, purchasers make up a smaller percentage of the list. So it's hard.
Yeah, I mean that's 100% right. I mean, I think the whole open pixel was rudimentary to begin with, and basically MPP came and stripped that out. In fact, the other thing we saw strip out in iOS 17, and we zap back one that a lot of people didn't talk about, but Apple was stripping out the recognized like tracking parameters. I'm talking about the URLs in both email and SMS, like the UTM parameters, like UTM source or marketing tokens. Those were really used and historically, and that's why like we saw what was it, Google Analytics sunset, right? That was allowing you to see a lot of this tracking behavior happen. And if Apple sees it in the URL, they were flagging it and removing it, meaning that you may see a spike in the whole direct traffic and lose the ability to map the campaigns when a user clicked from it.
And dude, if those iOS changes weren't enough, let's not forget about ATT, which stands for App Tracking Transparency. And this was actually predated to the iOS 15 and 17 that we just talked about. This was part of the iOS 14, specifically iOS 14.5. And this was something that a lot of like the media buyers were kind of up in arms about. This was the one that really made things more difficult for them, like the whole iOS 14 series. But specifically what AT&T is, and it's still obviously super important today, essentially apps need to get explicit user consent to track them across other apps. And with that, so as of last year, the majority of iPhone users still have opted out, which really limits the ability to retarget and really to understand cross-channel attribution. And attribution already is this whole black box. It's already very confusing and challenging and hard as is. This certainly didn't help, right? This certainly makes it harder for a lot of us. And collectively, right, like across all of these changes, Apple says they're doubling down on privacy. Sure, maybe it's great for user trust or whatever, but it's really forcing us marketers to have to work harder, have to work smarter, and really kind of question like, how do we measure success?
Yeah, I mean, dude, 14.5. I mean, people still have nightmares about it. I always laugh that iOS 14.5 is probably the only thing that like media buyers still talk about from 2021, and they're like when 14.5 did this, and I'm like, yo, we're on iOS 18 something, get over it. But I
Hard.
did a hot take on Twitter a while ago, and people are still very bitter about it, so they're not they're not over it yet still today. So Chase, I have the $1,000,000 question, and I want to make this so glaring black and white because people it isn't coming through people's heads hard enough right now. So the $1,000,000 question is, why are open rates now misleading?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'd say for a long time, right, like open rates used to be like the go-to metric. It's something that we all, over the past had determined as a key factor of success. But again, as mentioned with kind of the MPP that we talked about before, 50 to 60% of your opens, right? I think it was 55 specifically, but let's say all of that's happening, majority of your opens are actually happening from Apple's proxy. You're getting artificially high numbers, right? It's just not real. It's not accurate. And it can be a little bit misleading if you still look at it as your main North Star. And we talked about this a little bit before, but to kind of double down, brands have talked about their open rates going from something like a 20% to a 40% or even 60%, meaning open rates have artificially 2 to 3x. It's just not real. And it's very confusing, right? And it makes a lot of things that you're doing, segments, automations, deliverability, everything becomes a lot more inaccurate and it's just harder to trust.
Exactly. It's amazing how we marketers tend to forget the old history. And we've talked about this in 2017, 18. If you got like a 12, 15% open rate, you're doing well because that's actually the reality of what open rates really look like, which actually turns all sorts of data all funny. So, first thing, some triggered flows may rely on that logic. People are using conditional splits that are like didn't open logic, for example. With MPP, because it shows openers, that logic is kind of broken and flawed now. And I've seen brands accidentally skip follow-up emails or wrongly assume subscribers that are engaged that are not engaged. So, it makes me start thinking, what do we measure now? Well, the thing that we talk about a lot, and we've talked about in a lot of podcasts and different things, is click rate, right? Click through rate. And what I like is even going one layer deeper and thinking deeper than just a click rate, but going click to open rate. Even though it's not realistic, it's still a little bit better of a measurement than just a general click rate, right? Conversion rates, you got revenue per recipient, and even unsubscribes. And those are genuine actions that reflect if a campaign is doing well or not, right?
Hmm.
Think about it this way. If someone clicks or buys, they're definitely interacting, and that's far more reliable than a open, which is a image that's opening. Hey, it's Jimmy, and I know you're enjoying the pod, but if I could just have 30 seconds of your time, I want to tell you about our friends at OmniSend. OmniSend is an all-in-one SMS marketing automation platform built specifically for e-commerce brands. They make it super easy to engage with their customers, drive repeat sales, and create those seamless, personalized experiences we're always talking about. One thing I love about OmniSend is they're trusted by over 125,000 e-commerce merchants worldwide, and their users absolutely love them. With a 4.8 star rating with over 5,800 reviews on the Shopify App Store, it's an obvious choice for your email, SMS, and push notification needs. In fact, Chase and I are in the process of moving Chase's newsletter, and their support team has been fantastic. Their platform is filled with tons of features, and it's incredibly easy to use. Their migration process has even been easier. They have this entire team to help you, and they have this great automated tool that brings your contacts right over from your favorite platform that you might be using today. Also, they aren't raising your prices constantly and calling them profile-based pricing alignment, so I really enjoy that about them too. If you're looking to take your email marketing to the next level, I highly recommend you check out OmniSend. They've got the tools, the automation, the expertise to help your brands grow and thrive. So head on over to omnisend.com/send it to learn more about scaling your customers' engagement today, and let them know Jimmy and Chase sent you. Now, back to the pod.
Yeah, 100%. And with that too, like you now have to really understand and kind of watch your complaint rate, or essentially, spam reports, because, open-based deliverability, right? Monitoring is less accurate. Unsubs and complaints can give you a clear health check on your sending practices. So you really do need to, and we've talked about this, you know, ad nausea at this point, but you really do have to make sure that you have things like Google Postmaster, kind of a Yahoo Sender Hub. You have to really make sure that you're looking at that. You got to look at your ESP's data. I mean, this is something that you should be looking ongoing. This isn't something you should check, every 3 to 6 months. I would look at this weekly, and at
Yeah,
the
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
I would say yeah, at the very least, right? You should be at least doing weekly.
Yeah, and dude, Google themselves says they don't track the open rate of emails, right? Their Gmail documents say they do not track at their level because they're so unreliable. And the truth is, we can't rely on these opens in 90 days. That can't be a re-engagement segment. The problem that people are skewing right now is that with data and privacy that's changed, that definition should be really skewed on clicks, purchases, website visits, because that data is not skewed by MPP.
Yeah, 100%. And with that too, right? Something that a lot of people probably have noticed is Apple's hide my email feature, right? So when you go to opt in or subscribe to a list, you have this ability to kind of mask the actual email, right? Kind of creates this phony, funny looking email address that it actually gets routed to the Chase at Gmail or the Jimmy at Gmail or whatever it might be, but it just looks funky. And with that, right? Like you might see multiple addresses now for the same user. So with that, making sure that you have good list hygiene is way more important than it's ever been.
Yeah, and ultimately, Apple's changes highlights that we should be actually focusing on the user's actual interest, not vanity metrics, and that's what an open rate really is. So we'll stand in this pod and we'll say it loud so that everyone can hear it. But now I want to flip over to SMS and how that's impacted. What is the impact on SMS marketing? Because there has been impacts that have happened in SMS, right? Chase, what have you seen?
Yeah, kind of similar to what we're talking about email, starting with like the link stripping and kind of the attribution challenges. So with SMS, right, like we already don't track opens, right? The data obviously does show that a majority of people do open it, whether they're removing the notification or actually opening it, right? A little bit of TBD. But iOS 17 essentially removes known tracking parameters, like we talked about before, from the links within these messages apps, right? So if you are relying on those parameters to see who clicked, you might be losing some of that data.
Yeah, exactly. And you see more traffic on Google Analytics labeled as direct, but it's really because your providers are linked, SMS and email, both of them are getting those provider links trackings like stripped out. So you might see fewer unique clicks on the one side because the ID token was stripped out, but the reality is it actually isn't. So this is becoming more and more unreliable. Chase, what else have we seen with SMS?
Yeah, it's a fun time to be a marketer, huh? Thankfully, they've
Yeah,
got
super
podcasts
fun.
like this. But the other thing I'd talk about is kind of two more things would be like the spam reporting and then like the filtering out as well. So again, Apple's spam filters now is filtering out unknown numbers, right? And then the kind of the report quote unquote junk feature means if you're sending irrelevant SMS campaigns or automations, whatever it might be, you can get flagged fairly quickly. It's very easy to get flagged actually. And if you get enough flags, carriers are going to start potentially throttling or even worse, blocking your messages entirely.
Yeah, and that probably is the next generation of how deliverability in SMS becomes more relevant is that throttling and blocking that might occur. And we have to respect these channels just like email. And I think this is something that marketers are going to start learning because SMS is something that people poorly are doing things like list hygiene. And I know we just did a pod on list hygiene. If you haven't heard it, you should go back and listen to it. But we talk about the importance of doing it because these are not, they're best practices today, but eventually best practices become legal or law or ways that things are behaving. They don't become best practice just because someone said it. It's usually because there's a reaction that's happening. So making sure you're keeping SMS frequency reasonable and ensuring that there's real value in every text is really important. All right, let's shift gears, and I want to do a bit of nerd out and do a little bit of a technical deep dive because I know we've kind of brushed on MPP and link tracking protection, but I want to dive into what it really means. So I'm going to start with MPP, which is mail privacy protection, right? So MPP, they load an image on Apple's server as soon as the email hits the inbox, right? And what they mean is they load all the images. So if you're sending an email, it's got images because you're sending an e-commerce email, whatever it might be. The way that OpenPixel is fired is through an invisible image at the bottom of the email or the top of the email. So that image automatically loads, which triggers that open signal to your ESP. And in data, you'll even see multiple opens if we see it and so much more. In fact, Chase, as we've seen it, remember, we've seen it with some of the stuff that we were working on recently where you're just seeing like, you may have like 800 opens, but you've got 8,000 opens behind it because the raw data is showing that something is triggering over and over and
Yep.
over again. And because it's scrambling IP addresses and location-based dynamics, it's really hard to track that down more than ever. And that's really what we're seeing with MPP. Chase, you want to do a deep dive on the tracking link change in iOS 17?
Yeah, so on top of that, right, again, iOS 17's link tracking approach. So essentially, this is what's happening. So Apple is specifically looking at and targeting kind of known marketing parameters. So if you have things kind of like the Facebook uh, ID, so it's like the FBCLID, right? So the Facebook ID, or things like the Google ID, which is like the GCLID, and there's a token of others, right? Like one's for email, one's for other top of the funnel, for TikTok, whatever. So if you use kind of traditional and standard UTM's, Apple, potentially could be stripping those. And with these, right? Like some people have tried renaming UTM's, but Apple at any point in time can just easily update their list. So it's a cat and mouse game. It's kind of hard to trick such a smart big player like that. Maybe temporarily you can, but over time, just know that they're going to probably catch on. So with that, it kind of comes down to ultimately we cannot rely on these link parameters for user level tracking. So we need to pivot now to the server side or kind of an aggregated measurement.
Yeah, server side tracking is pretty interesting when you think about what you can do. And it's not always accurate. It might be a little bit better, but things like PCM, which is private click measurement, will let you track the conversion in a privacy safe way, but it's complex and reality is most brands will never get to that. So I want to shift gears because I wanted to kind of share that so you guys understand that there's this depth to this knowledge of like what's actually happening in this market and how these things are really skewing the data that you might be seeing. So the question I have, Chase, is how do we adapt to this strategy? Let's tell the listeners how to solve this. Like how should people be thinking about it?
Yeah, so let's talk about some kind of, I guess, lesser known or lesser talked about KPIs. So a brand that I was worked with realized that once, the MPP thing inflated all their opens and their opens were no longer correlated with clicks or revenue, we made the decision, let's shift to our KPI and kind of the focus of revenue per email sent. So, opens, clicks, all those types of things. Obviously, they speak to trends, but they aren't as important and kind of the source of truth as they used to be. So why don't we look at revenue per email sent? So essentially, let's just focus on clicks, conversions, and actual dollars, in our store. It's so much
Yeah,
easier that
that's
way.
right. Yeah, that's the only way I think you're tying revenue directly to a campaign these days. And also tracking those unsubscribes and spam complaints if they spike, right? It's really trend lines that you're looking for. They indicate if the email is either hitting the wrong audience or if you're sending too often.
What's up, guys? Real quick, I need just 30 seconds of your time. You already know that personalization is the holy grail of retention marketing. It's that unicorn that we're all chasing. No pun intended. But let's face it, time, resource, and nonstop content changes can make it incredibly difficult for any retention marketer to create real personalization. Well, not until today, that is. I'm really excited to share that Nacel's new AI-powered product recommendation solution is here. And this AI-powered suite goes way beyond basic customers also bought recommendations. It actually analyzes the entire customer journey. Yes, that's right, from first click to checkout. So you can deliver hyper-relevant experiences to each of your customers. Okay, let me make this super simple for you so we're on the same page. So basically, their AI is going to analyze each customer's complete product journey. It's going to create a product collection to automatically push into your email marketing campaigns, which is going to generate a dynamic landing page with those exact personalizations and those exact recommendations. This is going to create a true, unified, personalized experience at scale. And merchants can transform their e-com store with AI-powered product recommendations that understand their customers' actual behaviors, not just their purchases. So if you're an e-com brand hungry for next level personalization, the ones that you always hear people talk about, but they don't actually give you a tool to use, now you have one. You have to check out Nacel's new AI-powered product recommendation today and let them know that Jimmy and I sent you. Now, back to the pod.
And we talked about this last pod, but first party data is becoming more and more important than ever because that information that is being provided by the user remains gold. Because if you add a preference center, run a quiz or poll, or encourage a loyalty sign up, that data is unaffected because it's a user driven action and does not get affected.
That's exactly right. So again, if a user tells you something, start paying attention. So for example, if a user says, I like running shoes, start targeting them with relevant offers to those running shoes. That's going to be way better, way more effective, and way more reliable than trying to glean interest from open-based signals.
Yeah, and even segmentation by actual engagement. I think that people are always using that open rate as part of their segmentation, but the reality is it's really hard. And I know what people are thinking, well, if I get rid of the open, I'm going to see a very much smaller audience. Well, the reality is, just like everything else, a very small subsection of your list is actually buying often. And if you can segment your list by clickers, buyers, site visitors, and you can see who's added items recently to their cart and different things like that, those are strong engagement signals.
Yeah, 100%. And with that too, it's also going to be just way safer for your brand's center reputation. So again, if a segment is purely unengaged by any metric, no clicks, no purchases, etc., consider sending kind of the sunset flow, right? The breakup series flow, essentially, that's going to remove people from receiving your ongoing frequent sends.
Yeah, no, that's a good one too to think about. I think these are things that we have to all think about as we're moving forward. And we have that webinar that we just did that we're going to publish next week into our pod. But we talk about a lot of this, the metrics that are
Yeah.
changing, the way you've got to think about deliverability. Now, here's a question, Chase. As we look into the tech space, because obviously marketers rely on technology, who or what are let's talk about who's addressing this stuff.
Yeah, I'd say like the prominent two that I've seen is kind of OmniSend number one and then Klaviyo number two. They're trying to filter out kind of quote unquote like these machine opens, right? These kind of bot opens and even potentially, bot clicks, although again, it's harder, it's not perfect. But this is going to help us refine kind of these engagement metrics, these open kind of click metrics. And then for kind of compliance, all brands that are sending bulk, or honestly, frankly, any brand listening to this really should be authenticating their domain. So all the kind of DNS records like the SPF, the DKIM, the DMARC, etc., and really keeping a strong and kind of close eye on bounce rates because having a really reputable, strong domain reputation is really key and really vital to making sure that you're hitting the inbox and the primary folder or the promotions.
And you know what's funny is for years people were afraid of dedicated domains or dedicated IPs when they're sending, and everyone's like, "Oh, I need to be on a shared structure. I'm worried," and stuff like that. The reality is everybody now at any kind of bulk volume is on a dedicated IP in one way or another. Even if you're on a shared IP pool, your domain is leading the front, and often that DKIM and SPF and DMARC is really just actually making you dedicated. And if you look at, I'm advanced, I want to go a little bit more. How do I figure this thing out? Well, there's things like Apple's privacy click measurement, which we mentioned before. There's also server side analytics that you can use if you're advanced, but that data is generally aggregated and not at the user level. So it's really hard to see, right? You're just seeing top level metrics. A practical workaround to all of this, if you're thinking about it, is thinking like unique coupon codes. That's a great way to really track if they're real humans, real things. You can also do dedicated landing pages per campaign. I'm a big fan of that because Apple can't strip out the code from that checkout page. So if you have a dedicated landing page, you can guide them along. You'll have a better experience. All right. Let's shift. I want to talk the future because I know we talk about all sorts of things. And today we're going to make some predictions and we talk about the future outlook and insights of what may or may not happen. Chase, what do you think is going to start changing into the future?
Yeah, I think the first big one is that privacy changes won't stop with Apple. I mean, first, Apple's not going to stop making these changes, right? They've kind of drawn the line in the sand and they're only going to just double down on being more strict and making it more difficult. But with that, too, I think other kind of big players, the Googles of the world, et cetera, are going to probably follow suit to some degree. So I know Google, for example, is exploring kind of a privacy sandbox for Android at least. And then also too, you've got like rising regulations around the world. So everything from GDPR in the EU to CCPA, which is specific to California, right? And I know you've talked about this. We've talked about this before. Like states, countries, continents, right? Like everyone is going to have something in some degree at some point in probably the coming years, right? I was surprised when you told me how many different countries have something already. It's shocking. And then with
Yeah.
that too, right? Like other industry experts are saying that this is the new normal. You're going to have less user level data and more kind of reliance on first party data and really just kind of looking at the blended aggregated data.
Yeah, I mean, that's the truth. Brands that are adapting by focusing on like genuine relationships and value-based marketing are going to continue to stand. I mean, it really comes down to treating your customers right, writing good emails, creating loyalty, making sure you're willing and engaging with good relevant offers and avoiding spammy blasts. As one email strategist put it, like Apple's change curbs bad actors, right? That's a term that we hear often, bad actors, and pushes legitimate brands to do better marketing. And I think it's a net positive for everyone at the end of the day when you think about what's actually happened. All right. We've packed a lot, man. This stuff was like, we got a little bit deep into a lot of the things we've done. And, the truth is at the end of the day, MPP is inflating open rates, iOS 17 is link stripping. So let's leave the listeners with some clear actions to kind of finish this thing off. So what are your top recommendations?
Cool. I'll share one and we can kind of go back and forth. So
Sure.
I'd say number one would be redefining success metrics. So we talked about this before, but you're basically changing and kind of looking at a different lens on like what we're going to focus and kind of prioritize. So again, click-through rates, conversion rates, revenue, unsubscribes, spam complaints, bounces, those all matter way more now than opens do.
Yeah. And then for me, I think about gathering first party data, right? Gathering and using more first party data than ever. I think that with the availability of tools and technology, with users wanting to have a better experience, implementing preference centers, quizzes, loyalty programs, anything that can foster direct and consensual data sharing is going to be one of the most important things because you're going to have to start relying on your customers to give you data because your data is going to be harder than ever to get.
100%. And then with all of this, right, like as you do kind of collect this data, just segment with it. So segment with real engagement. So clicks, purchases, site visits, these are the new definitions of kind of active subscribers and make sure that you're leveraging those within your segments.
Yeah. And so the last thing I can think about when I think about this is just staying compliant and transparent, man. Doing your technology stuff, honoring your unsubscribes, be upfront about the data usage. I think the big thing that we're learning right now is privacy equals trust. And trust is what the world wants to get into. And it doesn't matter if you're a business selling tchotchkes or clothes or whatever it means. people want to trust you, because just like they come into a store to make a purchase of your product, it's the same thing. People just want to have that. And if they trust you, they will engage with you, they will like you. And it really just comes to doing better marketing, man, at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly right. And I'd say, kind of the takeaways, keep an eye on Apple's updates and any other kind of big tech updates. Privacy is going to change, it's going to evolve, it's going to maneuver, right? And if you can remain kind of agile and really customer focused, that's where you're going to thrive. So I guess that's kind of it for our deep dive on all of these Apple privacy changes.
Yeah, well, that is, and we'll wrap it here, because hopefully the listeners, their brains didn't explode, or they didn't tune us out by now, or think that we're just talking random jargon. But that's a wrap for episode 24, navigating iOS and privacy changes, email and SMS marketing in the new era. We talked about a lot of stuff here today. Probably worth a re-listen if you didn't understand any of this stuff. What it really comes down to is one simple lesson, I think, at the end of the day. You got to start adapting. You got to start changing. The things that you did 5 years ago are no longer working, and the next 5 years are going to continue to evolve again. And if you don't stay and listen to things like us, for example, on this podcast or our newsletter, or, listen to other experts, or continuously go out and test, you're really not going to be able to optimize and grow. And that's really where the world is. And we've talked about this. Deliverability is the forefront of a skill that people need to be thinking about in 2025 forward. If you're into retention, you're no longer just retention. You are now have to be a deliverability expert just as much. So if you've enjoyed this pod today, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast listening platform. We always recommend YouTube, but you can follow this show on X, LinkedIn, IG, or TikTok as well. And there's a few ways to connect with us. First and foremost, if you enjoy what we talk about, we drop a near daily newsletter at this time called Ecom Email Marketer, and you can join us. We're going to tell you about all these things. We do a lot of breakdowns lately. We're having a lot of fun just breaking down very popular D2C brands, and we even had a couple people respond. They're like working on the brand, and they're like, hey, thanks for giving me tips about my own brand, right? So we enjoy the service we're doing. Secondly, if you really enjoy listening to this and you really want to nerd out with other people like us and other people like you, we have this community and certification program. It's called Ecom Email Certified. We're going to throw a link in the descriptions, but ultimately we've got a community of 340 members here today and growing. And then the second thing is, if you want to learn more and get deeper into this stuff about email and SMS, we have a training program. It's a certification program of 25 hours that you can come take out, and you should go check that out. It's the ecomemailcertified.com. Last, if you want to follow us on social, because we drop tips all the time. Chase, where are you found, dude?
Most all platforms, Chase Diamond, no A in Diamond.
Yep. So you can find him on LinkedIn, X, Instagram, YouTube, Threads, everywhere. And I'm found mostly on LinkedIn and X here today. All right. Next week, and I already kind of teased this before, but we're back next week with a special talk all about deliverability. So we just did privacy. We're going to go back to deliverability because we believe it's so important. We did a talk, about 500 people virtually about 2025 deliverability. And we kind of got really nerdy on that one too. We broke down how deliverability really is working today, what you should be doing. And you're going to hear some of the echoes of things that we talked about, but we put it into a pod. We felt it'd be powerful for all the listeners to tune in. So we're going to do that next week for our pod before we go back to our next pod. With that, we are done. So Chase, thanks for jumping on as always. And I'll see you next week, dude.
From the open to the click, they're the masters of the flow. Just watch your list grow and your leads turn to go. Did we retain you so far, or do we have to extend it? If you want results, you gotta send it. Yeah, you gotta send it. Yeah, you gotta send it. Yeah, you gotta send it.